Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized. For what purpose does he rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last words.
Gentleman's recognized 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to fiscal 2012 Interior and Environment Appropriations bill. I do want to start on a positive note. The bill would restore the President's proposed cuts to mitigation fish hatcheries. That's a good thing. It would increase funding for the Indian Health Service, and it would largely maintain funding for the National Park Service operations and the Smithsonian. So I commend the subcommittee for those decisions. But I'm afraid the list of positive things is pretty short. And so I want to, in the time I have, list some of the devastating cuts that this bill includes. And while our friend from California has suggested that these really aren't deep cuts, I believe the content of this bill belies that notion. The bill before us picks up where H.R. 1 left off last spring, making numerous and deep cuts to the programs that protect our air, water, public lands, and wildlife. Here are just a couple of the most egregious cuts in this bill. First, to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This funds the acquisition of public lands so they're protected from development and can be enjoyed by future generations. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has a dedicated revenue stream from offshore drilling royalties. It takes nothing from the general fund. And yet, this bill would cut Land and Water Conservation Fund funding by 80%, the lowest level of funding for the program in 45 years. It threatens completion of the acquisition of the Rocky Fork Tract in East Tennessee and several treasures in North Carolina that need protection. Every member of this body should ask, how many acquisition projects would this halt in my state? There is no reassuring answer. Secondly, the Environmental Protection Agency. The bill continues the Republican majority's assault on the EPA. After imposing a 16% cut in the current fiscal year, the majority is now proposing a further 18% reduction in the agency's budget. That would push agency staffing to 1991 levels. The goal of a cut so massive is plain and simple, to ensure that EPA doesn't have the resources it needs to fulfill its core mission. And that mission includes life-saving and life-enhancing research, largely based in my district at Research Triangle Park. Third, the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, the SRFs, provide funding directly to the states to fund water infrastructure projects that enable communities to better manage wastewater and polluted runoff and to protect clean and safe drinking water. This provides one of the most basic services taxpayers expect, clean water. And yet this bill would cut funding for these two programs by nearly $1 billion combined. Given how essential water supply is to economic growth, this is ironic at this particular time as our communities struggle to retain and regain jobs. I suggest to colleagues, ask your state and local governments how they're going to make up this difference. Mr. Chairman, as if these cuts weren't bad enough, the majority has loaded this bill with legislative policy riders and funding limitations that will roll back 40 years of progress towards clean air and clean water. These anti-environmental riders have no place in an appropriations bill. They will not save the country a penny, and they will cost tens of thousands of lives. They will expose our children, families, and communities to unnecessary illnesses, and they will degrade our irreplaceable natural resources. The majority claims that these cuts are needed to demonstrate fiscal discipline. But, Mr. Chairman, this book is a textbook case in false economies. In gutting critical environmental protection programs, it piles up frightful economic and human costs for the future. Our constituents and our environment, today and in future generations, deserve better than what this bill is offering. I urge my colleagues to oppose this short-sighted appropriations bill. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose